My beloved child, wait, because the smile on your soulmate's face disappeared the exact second the psychic mentioned you. Until that moment, everything had felt ordinary. Your soulmate had walked into that conversation expecting nothing more than a few curious words about their future. They were relaxed. They were smiling. They even believed they already understood where their life was heading. But then the psychic became strangely quiet. She looked at your soulmate for a long moment and said, "There is one person whose presence has influenced your choices more than you realize." Your soulmate smiled again, almost dismissing it, until she began describing you. Not your name. Not some obvious detail. Something deeper. She described the way your connection had remained in their thoughts even when life became busy, the questions they had never completely answered, and the strange feeling that one unfinished chapter still mattered. That was when the smile vanished. Don't skip, because what she said next was the reason your soulmate suddenly stopped treating this conversation like entertainment. The psychic leaned forward and told them, "You keep thinking this person belongs to your past, but you haven't understood what this connection taught you yet." Those words landed differently. Your soulmate had spent so much time trying to appear certain, acting as though every decision had already been made, but hearing you mention forced them to confront something they had quietly avoided. Whenever they imagined the biggest turning points of their life, somehow your memory kept appearing beside them. And then came the first revelation. The psychic told them that the most important thing about this connection wasn't what had already happened. It was what your soulmate was finally beginning to understand about themselves because of it. Stay till the end, because that was only the beginning. Something shifted in the room after that. Your soulmate stopped smiling completely and asked a question they had apparently been holding inside for much longer than anyone knew: "Why can't I completely forget this person?" The psychic didn't answer immediately. That silence made everything feel heavier. Then she explained that sometimes a person stays in our thoughts not because destiny guarantees a particular ending, but because something meaningful remains unresolved inside us, something we still need to understand, express, forgive, or finally become brave enough to face. Your soulmate went silent. Suddenly, memories they had pushed aside began returning one after another. Conversations that seemed small at the time, moments when they almost said something important, times when pride or uncertainty made them remain quiet, and choices they now viewed differently. But here is where everything changed. The psychic said, "You are asking whether they still think about you, but that isn't the question you should be asking." Your soulmate looked confused. Then what should I ask? The answer was unexpected. Ask yourself why the thought of losing the possibility of speaking honestly to them bothers you so much. That sentence completely changed the direction of the reading. Something huge is waiting for you, because your soulmate suddenly realized the psychic wasn't predicting some magical event. She was exposing a truth your soulmate had been avoiding. They were afraid that time would keep moving while the words they wanted to say remained unspoken. What if one day they looked back and realized they had allowed hesitation to make the decision for them? What if the biggest surprise wasn't that you were mentioned at all, but that hearing about you revealed exactly where their emotions still became uncertain? Don't skip now. The strongest revelation hadn't even arrived. Then the psychic said something that made your soulmate sit completely still. There is a decision approaching, and this person is connected to the reason you will make it differently than you would have before. Your soulmate immediately wanted to know what decision she meant, but the psychic refused to reduce it to one dramatic prediction. Instead, she explained that your soulmate had reached a point where they could no longer keep choosing comfort simply because honesty felt difficult. That changed everything. Your soulmate had entered the room smiling because they expected to hear about opportunities, success, and some distant future. Instead, they were being confronted with one simple question: when something genuinely matters, will you finally speak clearly, or continue hoping the other person somehow understands what you never said? Your soulmate lowered their eyes. And then came the moment they weren't prepared for. The psychic said, "Before you decide what happens next, there is something about you that you need to recognize." Your soulmate looked up immediately. The room became silent again. Stay till the end, because the next words were the ones that transformed their entire expression. She told them that your presence had become connected in their mind with a version of themselves they had nearly forgotten, the version that wanted to be courageous, sincere, and completely honest about what mattered. Suddenly this wasn't simply about remembering you. It was about what remembering you awakened inside them. Your soulmate walked into that room smiling because they believed they already knew themselves. Now they weren't smiling at all, because one unexpected mention of you had uncovered a question powerful enough to change their next choice. And just when they thought the reading was finished, the psychic looked at them once more and said, "There's one more thing you need to know about this person, and once you understand it, you may see everything that happened between you differently." The next sentence changed the entire atmosphere. Your soulmate expected the psychic to talk about another memory, another coincidence, or something they could easily brush aside. Instead, she looked directly at them and said, "You've been trying to understand this person from the wrong side of the story." Your soulmate froze. What did that mean? The psychic continued, "You keep focusing on what happened between you, but you haven't noticed what changed inside you afterward." Suddenly, the smile they had entered with felt like it belonged to another person. Don't skip, because this was where the conversation became impossible for them to ignore. The psychic explained that every time your soulmate tried to convince themselves they had completely moved forward, one particular question returned: what if I misunderstood what this connection was trying to teach me? Your soulmate didn't answer. They didn't need to. Their expression already had. And then she revealed something even more surprising. There was a moment when you almost chose honesty. You almost said what you truly felt. But something stopped you. Your soulmate's eyes widened. They remembered exactly what she meant, not because the psychic somehow knew every detail, but because the sentence touched the one memory they themselves had never fully resolved. There had been a moment when the words were almost there. A moment when one conversation could have become completely different. But hesitation won. Silence took over. And life continued. Stay till the end, because what the psychic said about that unfinished moment made your soulmate see you differently. She told them, "Stop thinking that the important question is whether you can return to the past. You cannot. The important question is whether you will repeat the same pattern in your future." That hit harder than anything else. Your soulmate had been searching for answers about you, but suddenly they were receiving answers about themselves. They began remembering all the times they had hidden behind uncertainty, waited for perfect timing, or expected feelings to somehow explain themselves without words. Then the psychic asked, if this person stood in front of you today and gave you one opportunity to speak without pretending, what would you say? Your soulmate went silent. Seconds passed. Then more seconds. Something huge is waiting for you, because their eventual answer wasn't what anyone would have expected. They didn't immediately say, "I miss you." They didn't make some dramatic promise. Instead, they quietly admitted, "I would tell them that I understand things now that I didn't understand then." And there it was, the revelation beneath everything. Your soulmate wasn't simply thinking about you because of nostalgia. They were looking back with a different level of understanding. Things they once interpreted one way now looked completely different. Moments they once ignored suddenly seemed meaningful. Even their own behavior looked different when viewed from where they stood today. Don't skip. The psychic wasn't finished. She leaned closer and said, "Then you already know why their name changed your expression." Your soulmate asked, "Why?" She replied, "Because they remind you of a truth you can no longer avoid." For the first time, your soulmate stopped asking what the psychic could predict and started asking what they themselves needed to do differently. That was the real turning point. The psychic told them that no reading could make their choices for them, and no prediction could replace an honest conversation. But then she asked one final question that stayed with them. What if the biggest change coming into your life begins the moment you stop waiting for certainty? Your soulmate became completely still. Stay till the end, because this is where the once-in-a-lifetime realization arrived. They understood that they had spent too long believing they needed some perfect sign before becoming honest about what mattered. Yet perhaps courage didn't arrive after certainty. Perhaps courage was choosing honesty while the outcome was still unknown. Your soulmate looked down, then slowly smiled again, but this wasn't the same smile from the beginning. That first smile had come from believing they knew exactly where life was going. This one came from realizing they still had the power to choose who they became next. And just as they prepared to leave, the psychic stopped them. "Wait," she said. Your soulmate turned around. The psychic's expression had changed. "There is one detail I haven't told you yet." Your soulmate returned to their seat. "What detail?" A long silence followed. Then she said, "The reason you came up today may have less to do with what happened before, and much more to do with the decision you're about to make next." Your soulmate stared at her, because they already knew which decision she meant. And what they admitted next changed the entire direction of the conversation. What your soulmate admitted next was something they had barely admitted even to themselves. They looked at the psychic and quietly said, "I've been thinking about reaching out." Suddenly, everything connected, the vanished smile, the memories, the unfinished words, and the decision the psychic had mentioned. But there was another layer. Your soulmate explained that several times recently, they had almost taken that step, only to stop themselves at the final moment. Not because they had nothing to say, but because they had too much to say and didn't know where to begin. Don't skip, because the psychic's response completely shifted their thinking. She said, "Maybe you're trying to prepare the perfect words when what matters is whether the words are real." Your soulmate became silent again. They had imagined countless versions of that conversation. Should they explain everything? Should they acknowledge what went wrong? Should they simply ask how you are? Every possibility created another question. Then the psychic asked something unexpected. What are you actually afraid of discovering? Your soulmate didn't answer immediately. Stay till the end, because their eventual answer revealed the heart of everything. That maybe I waited too long. Those words changed the room. The psychic didn't promise them an outcome. Instead, she reminded them that nobody can control another person's response, but people can decide whether they continue allowing uncertainty to speak for them. And suddenly your soulmate understood why hearing about you had affected them so deeply. It wasn't simply because they remembered you. It was because your memory represented a choice they had never fully made. Then something even more surprising surfaced. Your soulmate revealed that recently they had begun noticing how differently they reacted whenever someone talked about relationships, timing, or second chances. They could be having an ordinary day, completely focused on something else, and then one innocent conversation would bring back the same unanswered question. What would happen if I finally stopped pretending this chapter meant nothing? Something huge is waiting for you, because the psychic immediately recognized the pattern. Then perhaps you aren't searching for permission to go backward, she said. Perhaps you're searching for courage to move forward without carrying unfinished words. Your soulmate looked stunned. That distinction changed everything. They didn't need to recreate yesterday. They needed to decide who they wanted to be tomorrow. Don't skip, because then the psychic asked them to imagine something simple, not some perfect reunion, not a guaranteed ending, but merely one honest conversation where neither person tried to predict the outcome. Could your soulmate handle that? Could they speak without demanding anything in return? Could they finally say what they understood now? Your soulmate nodded slowly. And that was when the psychic noticed something remarkable. The tension in their expression began disappearing. Not because they suddenly knew what would happen, but because they finally understood what was within their control. They could choose clarity. They could choose respect. They could choose honesty. And whatever came afterward would at least be real. But the conversation still wasn't finished. Just when your soulmate thought they had reached the biggest realization of the reading, the psychic asked one final question. There's something you haven't told me. Why were you smiling when you first came in? Your soulmate almost laughed, but then their expression changed. Stay till the end, because their answer revealed something nobody had expected. They admitted that before entering, they had already made a private decision. They were going to stop thinking about you entirely. They had told themselves this would be the day they finally closed the chapter without looking back. That was why they had seemed so relaxed. They believed the decision was finished. Then, without your soulmate mentioning you first, the conversation somehow turned toward the exact emotional question they had been trying to bury. The psychic looked at them and said, then maybe today isn't asking you to chase the past. Maybe it's asking you to stop lying to yourself about what still deserves understanding. Your soulmate stared at the floor. That sentence stayed with them. Something huge is waiting for you, because moments later they made a decision, but not the one they had planned before walking into that room. They decided they wouldn't force anything, assume anything, or build fantasies around what might happen. Instead, they would finally become honest about what they had learned and what remained unsaid. But before they could leave, the psychic suddenly remembered one detail from earlier in the conversation. She called your soulmate back and said, "There is one question you need to answer before you do anything." Your soulmate turned around. The question sounded simple, but their response would determine everything that happened next. If you contact this person, are you doing it because you truly respect what they mean to you, or because you're afraid of letting go? Your soulmate's answer surprised even themselves. For several seconds, your soulmate couldn't answer. That question had exposed the one difference they had never seriously considered. Were they thinking about you because they genuinely valued the connection, or because they were simply uncomfortable with the idea of an unfinished ending? Don't skip, because their answer changed the entire meaning of the reading. Your soulmate finally looked at the psychic and said, "If this were only about being afraid to let go, I think I would be asking how to get them back. But that isn't what I want to ask anymore." The psychic leaned forward. "Then what do you want?" Your soulmate took a slow breath. "I want them to know that I finally understand what I couldn't understand before." That was the moment everything shifted. This wasn't about controlling an outcome. It wasn't about demanding another chance. It was about finally becoming brave enough to acknowledge what the connection had taught them. Stay till the end, because the psychic then pointed out something your soulmate had completely missed. Throughout the entire conversation, whenever they talked about the future, their voice sounded uncertain, but whenever they talked about what they had learned because of you, they became incredibly clear. Your soulmate suddenly realized that maybe the biggest revelation wasn't about whether two people would find their way back to each other. Maybe it was about how deeply one connection had changed the way they understood honesty, timing, and courage. The psychic said, "Then whatever you choose next, choose it from clarity, not pressure, fantasy, or fear." Your soulmate nodded, but then asked the question that had been building from the beginning. "Why did you mention this person before I told you anything about them?" The psychic paused, and her answer was completely unexpected. She said, "Because the moment we started talking about the decisions that shaped you, your attention changed." Sometimes people reveal what matters to them before they ever say it aloud. Your soulmate sat completely still. There was nothing supernatural they needed to blindly follow. The revelation was simpler, and somehow more powerful. You had remained connected to one of the most important emotional turning points in their life. Something huge is waiting for you, because your soulmate then began putting together pieces they had never connected before. They remembered how differently they had started thinking about communication after everything happened. They remembered becoming more careful about what they left unsaid. They remembered recognizing that silence can sometimes create more confusion than an imperfect but honest conversation. And then the psychic asked, "If you could change only one thing about how you handled this connection, what would it be?" Your soulmate answered immediately this time, "Would have spoken sooner." No hesitation. No uncertainty. That answer surprised even them. Don't skip, because right there, your soulmate understood the decision they were truly facing. It wasn't simply, "Should I reach out?" The deeper decision was, "Will I keep becoming the person who waits until meaningful moments disappear, Or will I become someone who communicates honestly while the opportunity still exists? Suddenly, you were no longer just the person being discussed in the reading. You represented the moment your soulmate realized they wanted to change an entire pattern in themselves. And then came the revelation that completely transformed their original plan. Remember, your soulmate had entered that room intending to close this chapter permanently. They had already convinced themselves that moving forward meant never looking back. But now the psychic offered a different possibility. Sometimes moving forward means understanding the past clearly enough that it no longer controls your future. Stay till the end, because your soulmate finally understood the difference. They didn't need to erase you to grow. They didn't need to pretend nothing mattered. They could acknowledge what was real, learn from it, and still respect whatever direction life took next. That realization brought back the smile, but again, it was different. It wasn't the casual smile from before your name entered the conversation. This smile carried understanding. Then your soulmate stood up, thanked the psychic, and reached for the door. They seemed ready to leave. But just before stepping outside, they stopped. Their hand remained on the door for several seconds. The psychic noticed and asked, "What are you thinking?" Your soulmate turned around and said something nobody in that room expected, "I know what I need to say now." The psychic didn't ask what the words were. She only said, "Then make sure they come from the person you are today, not the person you were yesterday." Your soulmate nodded and walked outside. But what happened after they left that room was even more surprising, because instead of immediately contacting you, they did something first. Something that revealed whether this realization was temporary emotion or a genuine change. And once you hear what they chose to do, the entire reason their smile disappeared when you were mentioned will finally make sense. Outside that room, your soulmate did something completely unexpected. They stopped. No rushed message. No impulsive decision. No attempt to force an answer from the future. They simply stood there and replayed the psychic's final words, "Speak from the person you are today." And suddenly they understood why that mattered so much. Don't skip, because this was the moment that proved the conversation had genuinely changed something inside them. Your soulmate opened their phone, looked at the screen, and almost followed the same pattern they had followed before. Type something, overthink it, erase it, convince themselves the timing wasn't right, and walk away. But this time they caught themselves. They realized the real obstacle had never been finding perfect words. It had been their need to know the ending before taking an honest first step. Stay till the end, because instead of sending anything immediately, your soulmate began writing down what they actually wanted you to understand. Not what they wanted you to do, not how they wanted you to respond, but what they had finally learned. The first thought surprised them. I understand now that silence doesn't always protect people. Sometimes it simply leaves important things unfinished. Then came another, should have been clearer when I had the chance. And then the sentence that made them stare at the screen, you mattered more to my growth than I ever knew how to explain. Something huge is waiting for you, because that sentence finally revealed why the psychic mentioning you had erased their smile. Your soulmate hadn't been shaken by a prediction. They had been shaken by recognition. Your name had opened the door to a truth they had spent far too long avoiding. But then your soulmate noticed something else. Every sentence they wrote was about the past. The psychic had told them to speak as the person they were today, so they deleted several lines and asked themselves a completely different question: what would honesty sound like without trying to recreate what once existed? That question changed everything. Don't skip, because your soulmate finally realized that a meaningful message didn't need dramatic promises. It needed sincerity. They wanted to tell you that whatever direction life had taken, meeting you had changed something important in them. They wanted you to know that certain moments they once misunderstood made more sense now. Most importantly, they wanted to stop hiding behind vague words. For once, they wanted to communicate without expecting you to read between the lines. And then something remarkable happened. Your soulmate started smiling again. Not because they believed they were guaranteed a particular response, but because they were finally choosing honesty over endless guessing. Yet before doing anything, they remembered the psychic's hardest question: are you reaching out because you respect what this person means to you, or because you're afraid to let go? Your soulmate read what they had written again. They removed anything that sounded demanding. They removed anything that placed responsibility for their feelings on you. What remained was simpler, calmer, and more genuine. Stay till the end, because when your soulmate looked at those final words, they realized they had become something completely different from the person who had entered that psychic's room smiling just hours earlier. Then came the moment they had avoided again and again. Your soulmate's finger hovered over the screen. They could return to silence, tell themselves they would handle it another day, and continue carrying the same unanswered question. Or they could accept that honest communication never comes with a guaranteed outcome. Something huge is waiting for you, because suddenly your soulmate didn't press anything. Instead, they locked the phone and looked ahead. Why? Because one final realization had arrived: before speaking to you, they needed to be certain they were prepared to respect any answer, including one they hadn't imagined. That was the true test of everything the psychic had told them. Could they be honest without trying to control what happened afterward? Could they acknowledge your importance without assuming they were entitled to a place in your future? Could they finally become the person who speaks clearly and listens just as clearly? Don't skip, because your soulmate answered those questions differently than they would have before. They decided that if they ever opened that conversation, they would do it with respect, patience, and no pressure. And that was when the biggest revelation finally became clear: the psychic hadn't changed your soulmate's future by predicting it. She had changed their perspective by forcing them to face themselves. But there was still one unfinished detail. Your soulmate suddenly remembered the exact moment during the reading when the psychic first mentioned you. And something about her wording hadn't made sense at the time. Now it did. She hadn't said, "This person is returning." She had said, "This person is connected to the reason you will make your next decision differently." Your soulmate looked at the phone again. And for the first time, they understood exactly what that decision was.